Hey everybody, Kronos here with some more War Thunder Simulator battle gameplay. Now, last time we took a look at the Spitfire Mark 1 in the Norway event, and this time we got a similar matchup with the Battle of the Atlantic event. But this time I'm on the other side and going to fly the Bf-109 and show you a battle in this mainstay of the Luftwaffe. Specifically the Bf-109 F-1, which is one of the 109 variants I think you don't see that often in War Thunder compared to say the F4, and I did not have any F1 footage in any of my videos before. So I am glad I got the chance to fly it here, especially since the F1 is my favorite F-Series 109 in War Thunder, but I will explain why a little later when I talk a little bit more about the plane. Now, as usual, let me give you a quick overview of the event the battle takes place in. The event is one of the World War II chronicles, and when I first played the event, it took me a while to recognize the map. At first I thought I had never seen this map and figured it must be a new one, but then I recognized it. The event actually takes place on one of the arcade maps called Cliffed Coast. In simulator battle mode you usually only see this map when you fly the 2 vs 2 duels, which also take place on this map. I guess they were looking for a map that represents the Atlantic coast, but did not want to use the same map they used in the Norway event again, and I think it's actually a pretty good looking map, although fictional. Now, the plane set is similar than the one we had in the last event I showed you, but a little bit further along in the timeline. For the British we got the Mark IIA and Mark IIB Spitfire for the fighters, and the Swordfish and Wellington as bombers. For the Germans we got the Bf-109 E3 and the Bf-109 F1, as well as the Bf-110 as fighters and the Jo-88 and the Heinkel 111 as bombers. Unlike the last event, in this one the teams are not even though. The British team has 2 players more. As I've mentioned many times in the past, I'm not a big fan of uneven teams in simulator battle events, as they often make the balancing worse, not better as intended. And this particular event is in my opinion a good example for exactly that. Uneven teams were just not necessary here, and the event would have been more balanced with even teams. Maybe the event creator did not expect so many people to fly the older E3 over the newer F1, and I hope that the event system will eventually be upgraded so that the matchmaker takes into account what planes the players actually choose to fly. Anyway, other than that, I found the event very entertaining to fly and I enjoyed the Bf-109 F1 quite a bit. So, a word or two on the plane. Well, as I've said, the Bf-109 F1 is one of the 109s you don't see that often. It is usually a bit overshadowed by the much more popular 109 F4, and even in the Battle of the Atlantic event, it seemed that more people chose to fly the older E3 than the newer F1. I think one reason for that might be that players are concerned about the armament of the plane. The F1 is the first 109 that features the typical centerline 20mm motor cannon. The gun is a MG-FFM compared to the MG-151 on the later 109s. Now, most people will have some experience with the MG-FF from the Bf-109 E3, which has 2 of them in the wings, and those guns have a well-earned reputation of being the worst 20mm cannons in War Thunder. They have a slow rate of fire, slow muzzle velocity, low ammo supply of only 60 rounds per gun, and worst of all, they do very little damage. So I assume many might be reluctant to fly a plane with only one such gun after seeing what the 2 MG-FF can, or better said can't do on the E3. However, the gun on the F1 is not quite the same than the one on the E3. The F1 has the MG-FFM, the difference being that the M version of the gun can fire the famous Minengeschoss high explosive round, a round specifically designed to take down aircraft, and it has very thin walls, which allows it to carry a lot more high explosive filler than a normal high explosive round. And firing those rounds, the MG-FFM is, at shorter ranges at least, one of the more powerful 20mm cannons in the game, and in combination with the centerline mounting of the cannon, more effective than the 2 normal MG-FF on the E3 combined. The downside of low muzzle velocity, rate of fire and ammo supply remains however, so I would suggest to use the cannon at short range if at all possible. Thankfully the F1 is fast enough to close in with the target. Now, let's talk about the plane's performance. The F1 is of course the first of the F-Series 109s, and the F is by many considered the peak of the 109 development. And I tend to agree, the 109F was in my opinion at its time ahead of its competition and the biggest step in the development of the plane since the replacement of the Humo engine with the DB601. Compared to the E3 we also have in the event, the F1 has a redesigned engine cowling, as well as new rounded wingtips for better aerodynamics, as well as some other aerodynamic improvements to go along with it, and the F1 has a stronger engine, a DB601N, compared to the E3's 601A. While the F1's engine is not as powerful as the F4's and therefore won't reach quite the speed of an F4, it's more powerful than the E3's, and that in combination with the aerodynamical improvements lead to higher speeds and a better rate of climb. Also, the better aerodynamics compared to earlier 109s help the F1 in a dive, as well as with energy retention, which is the 109's bread and butter. Now, the F1 is slightly heavier than the E3, so it will turn slightly worse, but it is still decent in comparison with later 109 models. Of course, dogfights with Spitfires should be avoided in every 109. Now, I have said earlier that the F1 is my favorite F-Series 109, and there's one simple reason for that. The F1 does not have the armor plate behind the pilot fitted, and I hate this thing with a passion. The armor plate that most 109s have behind the pilot massively hinders vision to the rear as well as up, thanks to the unfortunate layout of the plate, and that makes flying the 109 in the vertical quite a bit harder. And I really wish removing the armor plate, at least the top part of it, would be an upgrade for the 109 in general. Anyway, not having the plate on the F1 makes keeping an eye on your opponent in vertical maneuvers a lot easier compared to later 109Fs, and since doing lots of vertical maneuvering is what the 109 does best, that is a very big deal for me, and the reason why I would pick the F1 over the F4 if given the choice. Well then, that was a bit of an overview of the plane. Let's take a look at the battle in it. Now, the 109 F1 is of course faster, it climbs better than its competition in this event, and has a great energy retention in vertical maneuvers. With vertical maneuvering being what the plane is really good at, you want to stay as fast as you can. Prop planes aren't jets, even a 109 needs some speed to properly maneuver in the vertical. If you're too slow, you just don't have the energy to do it. So at the start of the fight I adjust my heading a bit to the side to not run headlong into the enemy, and then attack the targets in the middle of the map with high speed. The first target I saw crashed, but I can adjust my heading enough to get a snapshot at another Spitfire and get a good hit on its tail. And then I pull gently up and just use the speed I built up in a slight dive towards the target to climb straight up again, in a very wide loop, and then look down through the roof and scan for more targets. I expect more planes, enemy as well as friendlies, to be in the area and hopefully below me. Now at this point I expect most enemies to be lower, but of course you should still try to keep an eye on what's at the same altitude as you as well. The biggest danger when climbing away from an attack like this is to be intercepted at low speed by an opponent on higher altitude that you missed. It seems I did enough damage to the Spitfire I hit earlier though that it went down, and shortly after that I can spot another one below me over the water, so I roll inverted and dive after him. I adjust my heading so that I can slot in behind him, and as I get closer I can see other 109s nearby, at least one of them also attacking from above. But the Spitfire sees me coming and turns hard to the left. Now, the last thing you want to do here is of course wasting energy in trying to follow the Spitfire's turn. You just can't do that. So I just pull out of the dive and climb straight up again, and so does the second 109 to my left. This time though, since I did not saw any enemy fighters on higher altitude earlier, I don't climb back up quite as high as I did the first time, and I come around a little earlier to do a second attack run right away and keep pressure on the Spitfire. As I approach, he turns left again, but not quite as tight, and I'm further out as he turns this time, so I can adjust my heading enough to get a deflection shot without wasting too much speed in the process. I do get a hit, but nothing major it seems, and as I climb and slowly loop around, I can see more Spitfires below. One is silhouetted nicely against the water, and I pick it as the next target and dive on it. This time the Spitfire ends up directly below me, and it's a pretty steep dive, and I close in pretty fast as a result. I try to get a deflection shot, but I don't give it quite enough lead, and my burst misses its target. As I pull back up though, I can see a Bf-109E behind me, and it looks like the Spitfire might be coming after him, so I loop around to get back on the Spitfire as fast as possible. Now, as I loop around and start to dive on the Spitfire, I can see tracers from another Bf-109, so I have to be careful not to collide with anyone or fly through the fire of a friendly plane. But then I can see the Bf-109 fly past, so I am clear to attack and I can get behind the Spitfire and fire a burst at very close range. and at this distance the cannon is quite effective. Well, and as previously, after the attack I of course climb back up again, looking for another target to attack. I assume at this point everything that is still in the fight is on lower altitude. However, this time, just as I level out, I see a Spitfire coming in from above, going after the second 109F that is on my altitude, and there's another one on the right, going after another 109. That surprised me. I figured if there are Spitfires higher than us, they would have made an appearance earlier. Anyway, I go after the Spitfire that is after the 109F, hoping I can get it off the 109's tail. The Spitfire goes into a steep climb, and I follow, and I'm about to open fire when it turns hard to the right, and I can see some traces from another Spitfire behind me. I of course again don't want to turn after the Spitfire, so I keep going more or less straight and climb a bit more, and check whom the other Spitfire behind me is following. Since he is not on me, I can come around and go after it. I can see the Spitfire firing on the 109, and they go into a loop and come my way. As they are about to pass over me, I line up the Spitfire's flight path and attack from below at short range. And the cannon round hit the engine and the Spitfire is out of the fight. But of course there are still a few more Spitfires around that are still in the fight, and I can see two below me. I go for the one closer to me that looks like it is not already under attack, and dive on it with a steep angle and slot in behind the Spitfire. However, he turns out of my way just as I am about to open fire. Again, I don't want to turn after the Spitfire, even if it looks like we got the upper hand at the moment, as it just presents too good an opportunity for a Spitfire to gain back the initiative if you do so. So again, I just go back up to attack from above. And I can see the Spitfire right away, which is flying towards the enemy airfield at a very low altitude. Now, normally I would be reluctant to go this close to the airfield and its AA, but on this map it's often unavoidable, and the AA here is not that strong, and it seems there are not that many enemy planes left. So I go after the Spitfire, though I have to throttle back a bit now, since after all that fighting my engine is overheating. As I close in on the Spitfire, he uses a split S to evade and dive away. And again, there is no reason to try to turn right after it. Turning is what the Spitfire does best. What the 109 does best is go up in the vertical. However, here I make a slight mistake. With the airfield AA and everything, I lose sight on the Spitfire for a second, and I figure he has to be close to the BF-109 that is also down there, so I dive towards the 109 while trying to pick the Spitfire up again. But the Spitfire wasn't as close to the 109 at that point as I had hoped, and I had to break off and come around again, and that gave the Spitfire, as well as the second newer rifle, enough time to get behind the BF-109. As I see them attack, I try to dive down and help out, but I am too late and the angle is bad for an attack, so I have no choice but to pull up again. So I regain some altitude and scan close to the ground behind me to try to locate the Spitfires again to attack from above. I thought I saw at least one of them fly along the canyon, but I can't spot them right away, and the AA is focusing more on me now, and even though it is not as strong on this map, I don't want to overstay my welcome close to this airbase. But I also know the Spitfires were pretty low and low on energy, and I also don't want to give them an opportunity to regain that energy if I can help it. I rather attack them now, so I do another circle or two trying to locate an enemy plane. But without luck. Then I see a BF-109 is flying towards the airbase, and as I scan along its flight path I can see a Spitfire, but before I can do anything about it, they do have a mid-air collision. Now, since I am not sure where the other Spitfires are at this point, and the AA is starting to make me nervous, I start about thinking to fly back home and rearm. I am down to only 18 cannon rounds, and with the machine guns being as horribly ineffective as they are at the moment, I don't want to have to rely on them if I don't have to. So I slowly start to make my way back towards my airfield, though I am still a little bit indecisive and not 100% sure yet if I should really go for landing now or wait a little bit longer trying to catch a Spitfire while it's still on low altitude. So when another BF-109 passes by me and flies towards the enemy base, I figure it's maybe the better option if I go after him in case he needs help. So I do a slow climbing turn back towards the direction of the enemy airfield. I turn around very slowly, scanning the area, as I still have hope I might spot an enemy plane somewhere around here. And as luck would have it, I can see a plane very low over the water, and as I take a closer look, it turns out it is indeed a Spitfire, so I come around to attack him. It looks like the Spitfire is doing a low-level attack on some ground targets. We are slightly in the lead with ground kills, and I figure the Spitfire is trying to even the score on that front. or maybe even win via ground kills. In any case, I can slot him behind him and fire a burst into the Spitfire. And as I pull up, I can see a second 109 going after the Spitfire, so I decide to stay above them and not go for another attack, so I can provide cover in case there's another Spitfire nearby. Well, the Spitfire eventually goes down, but at the same time the Bf-109 that went for the airfield did as well. Well, since I am now really almost out of cannon ammo and there is no more point in trying to cover the 109 that went to the airfield, I decide that now is really the time to head back to base and land to refill my ammo and fuel. By now there's only one enemy plane left. Now as I rearm, the other 109s make their way towards the enemy airfield and I eventually follow after my plane is rearmed. As I make my way there, I use the 109's good climb rate to get some altitude while flying towards the enemy base, and as I arrive, the Spitfire got the jump on the 109s and managed to get one. I can spot him as he chases after a second one and start to dive after him. As I come down from very high altitude, I build up a lot of speed, so I have to trim down the nose pretty good to get a stable shot. I get behind the Spitfire and close in fast. I'm almost close enough for a good shot, but the Spitfire sees me coming and pulls up hard. I plan to just climb straight above him and come back down on him, but the Spitfire overdid it when he pulled up this hard and stalled and entered the spin. I pull up in a loop and come around to be in a position to attack if the Spitfire gets out of the spin, but it seems he doesn't have the necessary altitude to do so in time, and he goes down. And well, that was the last plane on the enemy team, so this is it for this battle. It was nice to have a chance to bring the 109 F-1 out for a spin. I found it to be very enjoyable to fly and quite powerful. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.